Welcome to Diverse Minds, Better Business, the podcast that delves into the depths of human potential, diversity, and innovation in the workplace. I'm Stacey Wallace, General Manager of My Training, and today we're joined by a very special guest, Martin Godfrey, a clinical psychologist with an in-depth understanding of neurodiversity and its impact on organisations. Martin, thank you for being here.
You're most welcome, Stacey. Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to cover such an important topic.
Well, let's dive straight in. Martin, for our listeners who might be new to the term, could you explain what neurodiversity is?
Sure. I guess we're sort of becoming more familiar with the word diversity as it's sort of been focused on across organisations. But when it comes to neurodiversity, it really is that diversity of people in terms of the different ways that they think and how they interact in the world. Now, I guess that's most commonly used when you think of disorders, neurological disorders such as autism spectrum disorder, ASD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, ADHD, or some specific learning disabilities such as maybe dyslexia. But what we're starting to see is that kind of umbrella of conditions that fall under it in terms of conditions is broadening a lot. So what comes to mind at the moment, there's even sort of mental illnesses coming in there as well under neurodiversity, maybe OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, bipolar disorder. And it's actually generally just become this term that sort of raises awareness that people are generally thinking differently and maybe behaving differently in the workplace. But you have got those kind of specific diagnoses in there as well. But the big thing for me at the moment, Stacey, is we're starting to sort of move away from seeing these conditions as a negative thing. It used to be the case, we'll take on a couple of these neurodivergent individuals and, that's us doing our bit for society and community. But what's actually happening now is there's a bit of a shift, more of a strengths-based approach. So individuals, society, organisations are really starting to see the strengths of neurodivergence coming through in terms of the different ways of thinking and behaving that can come into an organisation and really start to use it as an advantage, actually. And in terms of the second part of your question there, why is it important? Well, I guess when you think about it, there's those differences in mental function, learning styles, maybe differences in sensory processing, different communication styles. So some people actually struggle with those softer skills that are maybe required in the workplace. And I'm thinking maybe specifically around things such as emotional intelligence, those social interactions that are
Mm.
involved in the workplace, or even just the ability to work in a group. And we'll look more at those kind of things as the podcast goes on. But sometimes it can be because of a deficit in those softer skills that there's really strong barriers in place for that neurodivergent person to participate and feel comfortable in the workplace as much as they could. So that can create a real problem for individuals trying to integrate into organisations. And I suppose when you think about it, those barriers are in place for an infinite number of organisations across the world. So it's a massive amount of people that are impacted by this and a massive amount of people that can benefit from maybe more awareness and more inclusion around diversity. So it's pretty huge when you think about it that way.
Absolutely, so huge. And that's why we're talking today, absolutely, to increase awareness around neurodivergence. And it's wonderful that you touched on that it's being viewed as a strength now, which is so wonderful to see.
Absolutely.
I'm now wondering how we can recognize neurodiversity, um, change our approach to work and collaboration. What can we do to sort of start to break down those barriers that you mentioned before that are really global and very much entrenched in organizations?
Mm. Well, where my mind goes with that, Stacey, is when I think of those softer skills that I mentioned there, the emotional intelligence, the social interactions, the ability to work in groups on maybe complex tasks, there is a number of things organisations can do. Um, and maybe when they're not sort of included or things aren't modified enough to help the neurodivergent person participate in those things, it can bring that lack of confidence around, being valued in the workplace, being able to communicate as well as they'd like to. And those things can really stop that person excelling as much as they feel like they would like to in the workplace.
Mm.
So emotional intelligence, it really is the ability for the person to manage their own emotions, but also for them to understand what other people are experiencing emotionally at the same time. So that can be
Right.
difficult for any person, I suppose, in the workplace setting, but it really is magnified for the neurodivergent person. And that magnification is something that is across these issues for the neurodivergent person, despite the fact that it might impact on people more broadly as a whole. So,
Mm.
that lack of emotional intelligence at times, it might create challenges emotionally that, for example, you might think your boss has been extremely authoritative and really trying to asking you to do too much at once, where in fact they might just be being supportive or helping you
Mm.
meet your goals, and it's trying to sort of filter through all of that emotionally that can be really difficult. Um, Social interactions, we all know, rightly or wrongly, how important it is to bring that social aspect into the office.
Mm.
I'm thinking about things such as how you approach people first thing in the morning, although maybe you don't feel like talking.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe how much interest you take in someone's home life, asking what they've got planned for the weekend. All of these things can be a bit more difficult sometimes for the neurodivergent person. And, with that difficulty, it can impact on those dynamics and that team collaboration that we're talking about here. And then just that ability to work in a group as a whole. It can be challenging for us all to work with a range of personalities and different
Mm.
strengths and weaknesses and people's needs and what they want to bring to the table.
Mm.
Um, but certainly for the neurodivergent person, to work with it, it can add that real additional challenge to becoming involved in what's happening in those daily tasks or longer term projects. Um, so yeah, that's another thing that we sort of need to watch out for. Sometimes because of those barriers, the neurodivergent person can be maybe seen as being a bit controlling or a bit noisy or a bit loud or a bit too colourful for what's maybe appropriate for the work setting.
Mm.
Um, and then I suppose in the contrary, that if they're really struggling to get involved in that group, they might be perceived as lazy or maybe not having enough interest in the topic. And maybe none of those things are true. It's just that the person doesn't feel that there's the right support or the right platform there to have that space for them to speak and contribute properly. So it is, all of those things are some of the things that impact on dynamics and collaboration. There's many others, but yeah, just trying to highlight some of the main things that maybe are an issue
Mm.
for people going into a workplace.
And it's so good just to be aware of those things so that if you are that manager that you cited before, just to perhaps moderate your behaviors to be, aware that that's difficult or challenging for a neurodiverse person.
It really is, and
So let's now, oh, you go.
I suppose what's been happening is there has been more awareness over maybe the last decade or a bit longer actually around mental health and mental
Mm.
health first aid courses being rolled out across organisations. And this seems like the next thing that's coming in is having this broader awareness around neurodivergence. So that's really exciting for organisations and the people that are going to be working within them, I think.
Yeah, it's like a global shift and a movement, and that is really exciting. Let's talk about the advantages now, Martin. From your experience, how can organisations benefit from embracing neurodiversity?
Well, it really is an exciting time for me, Stacey, in regards to these themes that we're talking about here. I think the future is going to look really good for neurodivergent people if we keep going on this kind of treadmill that we're on, and this awareness and the training that's getting rolled out gets increased. Way back about, it must be around 20 years ago back in Scotland, I could see even back then when there was a bigger stigma attached to employing people with disabilities. Um, those benefits were really obvious to me back then.
Mm.
So to see what sort of happened since then, and things sort of moving further in that direction, from the UK maybe even across to Australia, some of that has sort of followed across. Um, but just some of the things that come to mind in terms of those benefits, Stacey, I can't cover them all. There's so many actually. There's challenges as well, but we'll speak about that in a minute.
Mm.
So things like, even simple things that maybe you don't think about when you're hiring people, they tend to have generally high levels of attendance, maybe less sick days. When you
Great.
look at the reasons for that kind of thing, sadly, neurodivergent people have really struggled to maybe obtain that employment that they're looking for, or sustain longer term employment. And then so when they finally find an organisation that really welcomes them and embraces the differences that they bring to the table, it can make them a really, really super committed employee. And what happens then is they stay longer, they maybe bring more energy to the job. Uh, all the productivity research shows how important it is to have at least one high energy person within that team. And
Mm.
sometimes that can be the neurodivergent person that brings this commitment and energy to the job, and because it's so important to them. And when you think about it, the prospect of people staying longer at the organisation is really something that's not minimal. I mean, think of everything that's related to that: the costs of recruitment, the onboarding costs, training, all of that stuff. It's really expensive and really time consuming often to keep this sort of ongoing recruitment process going. So if you can keep a couple of people in teams that have been there maybe a while, it reduces those costs, and maybe that person usually builds up a bunch of knowledge from different teams across the organisation. So they can really turn out to be this pillar of knowledge within the team,
Mm.
which is really great to see. Something else actually that comes to mind is just that customer service aspect of it. So, Stacey, I think in my experience, and I saw this even back in Scotland all those years ago, people actually like dealing with people that are a bit diverse. They like being
Mm.
provided with a service from people that are maybe not just this kind of robotic version of
Mm.
what the organisation wants to portray. They want someone that can provide good service, obviously, but someone that has maybe a different style of thinking, a bit of a different personality,
Mm.
someone that's going to maybe add something to their day. And these things can really benefit an organisation as well in terms of that customer service. Um, what else? There's other things like, because of that difference in thinking and the way that they behave, there can be tasks involved that maybe they like to take on more than maybe other people doing the role that might not like so much. So it really is about trying to figure out what their
Mm.
strengths are. Can they do some of these jobs that maybe people don't want to do? Um, will they take on jobs from other people that they're going to enjoy, flourish in, and sort of spread that out a bit so that everyone's trying to do tasks that they specifically enjoy, and that really builds that culture of meaning and enjoyment to the workplace, which is massive as well. But at the
Mm.
same time, the neurodivergent person can really flourish as well, and can take on anything if it's the right role for them. Um, in line with that, I guess the final benefit that I think I want to touch on for the podcast is because of that different style of thinking at times, it leads me into thinking about problem solving in a workplace. Now, neurodivergent people can be extremely good problem solvers, and that is often the case because maybe there's been an issue in a company for months, years, a decade, perhaps, and someone comes in with this different perspective, different way of looking at things, and they can see the issue there. They can see the problem just because of that different way of looking at it. So, I mean, there's a number of benefits to that kind of issue coming up, and that kind of benefit there as well. So, it really is mind blowing what these people can bring to the workplace if given the right opportunity and if the environment is set in the right place.
Just the difference in thinking and problem solving is a huge benefit in itself. We know that teams benefit from having multitudes of thought and diversity of thought. So that benefit in itself, if it was just the only benefit, would be enough. But there's more that you've outlined. So thank you so much.
Exactly. Yeah.
Could you share some successful strategies or programs that organisations have implemented to support neurodivergent people?
I think this is getting so much better across the board. I think there's still some work to do. I think organisations are maybe already seeing the benefits of some of the stuff getting rolled out. The first thing that comes to mind would be around recruitment.
Okay.
That real first phase of a person's employment journey. So, if you get the recruitment aspect of it right, making sure it's inclusive as it can possibly be. Some organisations are adopting maybe percentage quotas around not only people with disabilities, but people with neurodivergence specifically. So that's helping them see the benefits that I mentioned there. If they can get one or two neurodivergent individuals on board, they start to see the benefits that it has, and then things can kind of grow on from that. And if a neurodivergent person applying for a role can see that it's a neurodivergent friendly employer, it can really get that person off to a really good start in terms of that employment journey, and lead into some of those benefits that I mentioned in the last couple of questions there. There's other things like peer support groups. So there can be differences, I think, in terms of how willing people are to disclose neurodivergence, and you don't want to be in a position where people are forced to disclose neurodivergence, but there will be people within organisations that really are looking for that connection with people that maybe face some of the same barriers in that employment, maybe facing the same issues in terms of connecting with people, fulfilling role tasks involved in the job. I mean, we all kind of seek out people in employment that we can sort of bounce ideas off and relate to a bit more than others, and that's really no different for the neurodivergent person. So that's important. Then I guess more kind of general things, disability awareness days, maybe neurodivergent awareness days, really bring that feeling of acceptance, value, that inclusive culture to organisations that really helps everyone flourish, not just the neurodivergent person. And then just that flexibility is always important. I keep hearing about people who've been diagnosed with neurodivergence because of COVID, because of the lockdowns, because of returning to the office, and some of those shifts or changes in flexibility or environment have really led to diagnosis in people. So
Wow.
I think, again, it reminds us of the importance of flexibility in the environment, the work environment, to help people feel safe and included, and let them, give them a place of work where they can perform and excel in.
That's so interesting. And another one, I suppose, is providing training, and my training through your lovely services. Martin provides training for organisations to raise awareness, and also to provide more of an in-depth understanding and strategies to support our neurodiverse people in the workplace. Like,
Absolutely. It's vitally important that people have at least that basic knowledge
mm,
of some of the barriers that people face in employment, and just even a slight insight into the divergence of thinking that can bring more empathy around the workplace, more understanding of what's maybe happening for that person.
mm.
So the more that we build on that knowledge, and by offering those training opportunities, the better that that environment can work out for the person for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you explained at the beginning, will hit the bottom line. It will hit that triple bottom line. Um, like any organisational change, there must be challenges. What are some common obstacles organisations face when trying to become more inclusive of neurodivergent people, and how can they overcome them? This is a pretty tricky question.
Yeah, there are challenges there. I think the training helps, which we mentioned there, because there is still some of that stigma there. I think it has been
Mm,
reduced significantly over the years, but there is still some of that there. It may be just with some individuals within a team, or maybe the odd person within an organization, but it is still there.
okay.
And if it's at the recruitment phase, that there can still be that perception of, oh, is this really going to cause us problems? Is this going to be too difficult? Is it maybe a bit too risky? All of that stuff can still come into people's way of thinking. But when you think of the potential benefits that we discussed there, they really do overpower a lot of that stuff that is involved in the stigma that I'm speaking about. Um, and I would encourage organisations not really to think too much about that first impression. I know it's a natural instinct as a human to let
Mm,
that first impression of person really impact on our perception of them. Um, but that's really, it can be really detrimental to the neurodivergent person if maybe they're feeling a bit more anxious than the non-neurodivergent person going to an interview, for example, or even just
mm,
filling out an application form. I mean, there's strange things, really, right? Application forms in the interview setting. There's
mm,
an interesting dynamic to that part of someone's employment journey that's maybe never going to be there for the rest of their time at that
mm,
organization. So I think it's really important to keep those things in mind when we're trying to overcome those obstacles and challenges.
mm.
Um, Knowledge gaps is obviously important as well, which can be covered by the training. Um, but also, I think when we have the knowledge, even when we have increased awareness around neurodivergence, it can be challenging actually to remember that that person is still an individual with their own personality, their own needs, their own strengths, their own weaknesses, their own different ways in which they maybe handle emotions, communicate socially. There are differences there, and I think it's important to remember that these people are individuals and not just label them with that neurodivergent tag. Whilst that's important to recognise the stuff that they're impacted by, this person is still, a person. So don't assume that there's things going on for them just because they're neurodivergent. I would say to really get to know the person, create that space where they can feel comfortable approaching you and telling you what they're struggling with, maybe what they'd like to do more of, maybe what their goals are, um, and really keeping that space open for the person, I would say.
I love that reminder, to take a person-centric approach, and
Mm,
that, a clinical diagnosis of ASD or ADHD, for example, is only one part of a person. It doesn't
yes.
make up the whole or full person. So thank you for
Yes.
that reminder. And it kind of leads us really nicely into the next question I have for you, which is
Mm.
aimed at leaders who are listening in today. What practical steps can they start to take to harness the power of neurodivergent people in their teams?
I would say, it doesn't have to be huge changes right away. Just those
Mm,
kind of gradual smaller steps in that direction always helps. So when I think of some of the things I've mentioned already, that recruitment stuff that I was thinking about, maybe that would be a good start if there's no one that sort of came forward as having neurodivergence in the organisation. Maybe have a recruitment campaign that specifically includes or even encourages neurodivergent employees or potential
Mm.
employees to apply. And by doing things like that, you can start to see maybe people coming forward that are already there within the team and start to be a bit more open, maybe disclose a diagnosis. Again, it's important to say that I don't think that's something that people should be pressurized to do.
Mm.
But by having that space where they feel like it can really help the person and help the company as well. And when you think about it, recruitment, if you do it in the right way, in this inclusive way, and I'm thinking about things of, I guess specifically of maybe adapting the application forms slightly, maybe making the interview process a bit less daunting. Those kind of things. Maybe they might want to bring a support person along. That doesn't mean they're going to need a support person for the whole of their career
Mm.
journey. It's
Mm.
maybe just that initial interaction in the organisation. So I really would encourage organisations to think about that, because you're potentially tapping into an employment pool that is so much larger than you would have previously.
Mm.
You could miss the next Elon Musk, right? If there's this is the thing, that there's
Yes.
people
Yes.
out there
Yes.
that just need to be given those opportunities, and they will come
Mm.
in. They will flourish. There's
Mm.
going to be issues just like there are with people in employment in general, but why shouldn't they be given that platform to flourish?
Mm.
Other things, I would really encourage having a strength-based approach, as well as that people-centric approach that we mentioned there. So it might be the fact that this person can't do one small part of the role,
Mm.
and maybe they're never going to be able to do that part of the role. It might take them slightly longer to learn that part of the role, but I think more flexibility around that, recognizing people's strengths, and maybe, more flexibility around their job role where possible. I understand the challenges organisations face in regards to that, but you could be missing out on someone that's maybe really great at 4 or 5 tasks and maybe can't do 2 or 3.
Mm.
So the costs of that are quite obvious when you think about it that way. Um, and yeah, the flexibility involved might help people with that. And then just maybe a bit longer term, Stacey, just I think a lot of this is down to culture, inclusion, just
Mm.
those respectful attitudes within the workplace that turn into understanding and empathy before judgment and authority. I would say something like that when I think about it.
Mm.
Everyone's got issues, everyone's got individual battles that they're facing. I think if there's something more broadly that can be done from the top down in regards to those things, it really can help everyone, and I guess specifically and particularly the neurodivergent person, just by that shift in attitude of trying to understand, maybe that person's struggling with this, or maybe that person doesn't like being in that specific environment. I can see there's an issue when they're interacting with this person. Just
Mm.
sort of being on top of those things and building awareness and care, actually, for others around you in the office or more broadly.
Thank you. Such good insights. Um, Before we wrap up, Martin, I'm really keen to hear your thoughts on the future. Where do you see the conversation around neurodiversity heading, and how can organisations prepare for the future?
Well, I was going to say neurodivergent robots there. Like, who knows what's coming in the future, Stacey? Um, but I think just neurodivergent people, I just want them to feel comfortable in the workplace. I want them to I want there to be a place where someone feels as comfortable disclosing neurodivergence as they have been with a physical issue, or maybe more so now a mental health issue. I'd like us to get to a place where a recruitment team maybe gets excited that someone's disclosed neurodivergence on their application form, rather than thinking about all those flaws immediately that jump to mind, or all those challenges that they might face, all of which might not necessarily be true. So it's those initial reactions at the application phase. It would be really nice to see a shift there, and I think that can happen with a lot of the work that organisations are doing in that space. I would like to see us get to a place where the neurodivergent person can just go into work and they feel that difference that they're experiencing in the way that they're thinking and behaving can be a strength, and not something that's going to exclude them, isolate them, not have that feeling that maybe, oh, I'm a bit different here and it's a negative thing. I'm never going to be the same as everyone else. You can be better than everyone else if the right things are in place. So I really would like to see those things coming through, and just seeing that confidence in neurodivergence, people feeling included, having their strengths organised, having their contributions valued, a lot of that more general and softer stuff that is so important in the workplace, Stacey. But I just would encourage organisations to take those small daily steps. It can occasionally help if people, further up, maybe disclose some neurodivergence or issues that they're having. That can be a real form of leadership, or a real sign that the culture is accepting of people with neurodivergence, and that it is a place where people can climb the ladder and flourish and be where they want to be. So that's something else to think. But I think just generally, just getting that workplace culture and that good feeling around the culture is the big thing.
Thank you for outlining that vision. Spectacular, and I hope it's not too far away. I hope it's closer than what we think with the work and that is being done at the moment. Martin, this has been an incredibly important conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. Where can our listeners learn more about your work and get in touch with you?
So I do work as a private practice psychologist at the moment, but I've got the same email address if people are contacting us around training, or even just to ask some questions around neurodivergence. And that email address is Martin Godfrey Psychology @gmail.com, just all lowercase. Happy to answer any queries that people might have or offer any advice where I can.
Oh, thank you, Martin. That's very generous of you. And as I explained earlier, Martin is a facilitator for my training, and also very happy to provide in-house training for corporates around this topic that we've been discussing today. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us today. We hope the episode has shed light on the importance of and benefits of embracing neurodiversity in the workplace. Don't forget to subscribe to Diverse Minds Better Business for more insightful discussions. Until next time, take care.